Hello everyone and welcome back to the Rah Rah Rabbit. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about dissociative disorders and in particular dissociative identity disorder. It's something that I have spoken about here whilst trying to make sense of and explain my own experiences, but I haven't really explained what dissociative identity disorder is. And as it's something that is widely misrepresented and misunderstood and still very much shrouded in mystery, I thought I would talk about it here. It's often highly stigmatized as well, which makes it even more confusing. Plus, most media representation has played into the stereotypes and fears that exist around the disorder. Split, for example, which was an alright film. It didn't really do a good job of portraying or accurately portraying what DID is, but as a horror film, it's alright. So dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder, but the name was very misleading. It suggests that a person has multiple personalities, that multiple people exist within one body, which is a good description of how a person with DID may experience the disorder, but isn't that accurate in explaining what the disorder actually is. Another misconception is it's the same as schizophrenia. One reason for this is the word schizophrenia translates into split mind, and people often mistake that to mean split personality. And because of its original name, multiple personality disorder, people often mistake it for a personality disorder, which is a completely different category of disorders. So what is dissociative identity disorder? As the name implies, it is a dissociative disorder. If you dissociate, you experience a disconnect between yourself and the world around you. You may feel that you aren't real or the world isn't real, or you may experience a disconnect between your thoughts, your feelings, your sense of identity, or have problems remembering things, or experience a loss of time. Everyone experiences dissociation to a degree. It's a very natural mechanism that we all have, and it's often used as a way for your mind to deal with anything that is too distressing or traumatizing to process and deal with at the time. When we are children, we don't have a complete sense of identity. Our sense of who we are, our sense of self, develops later on in childhood. All of these aspects of ourself become integrated into one full person, and we are able to realize that our thoughts, our feelings, our memories all belong to us. However, someone with DID will have a much harder time with this. If someone has experienced repeated trauma at an early age, typically before the age of 9, and haven't had the correct support in place to deal with and process this trauma, then we dissociate and split off these experiences or these memories from our consciousness. And this is where alters or alternative personalities come from. They are all parts of ourselves that function independently from one another, rather as one full person, like everyone else. Our identity is fragmented. We may hear our alters audibly, or may just hear them in our heads, or experience them more as thoughts, but thoughts that aren't coming from us. For me personally, I hear mine audibly. And this is why I've always referred to them as voices, because before I was aware what was going on, I did hear them. I thought they were something outside of myself, so I typically still just refer to them as voices rather than alters, because that's just the word that I have used personally to describe what they are like. And this can make things even more confusing, because there seems to be this idea that if you hear them audibly, that it's an auditory hallucination, which is usually linked more to schizophrenia or psychosis. Whereas if you hear them internally, if you experience them more like internal dialogue than an actual voice, then that's more like DID. But that's quite a reductive way of looking at it, and it isn't very accurate, because people can experience their alters in many different ways, and that makes it even more confusing when it comes to being diagnosed, because typically it can be quite difficult to get an accurate diagnosis with DID. A lot of people will be diagnosed as schizophrenic or having borderline personality disorder, which at the same time, it is possible to have DID and another disorder. It's quite common actually for that to happen. So a lot of symptoms kind of overlap, and sometimes it can be hard to kind of separate them. So again, it kind of adds to the whole confusion of what DID is. And it's also not as overt as you may think. Again, when you look at media representations and the kind of stories that you tend to hear about DID, each personality seems to be drastically different from each other, and it's quite obvious who's out and who's about. But really, in most cases, you wouldn't know if a person had DID. You wouldn't know if you were talking to a different alter at different times, because it tends to be a lot more covert. After all, DID is a coping mechanism. It is a way of survival. So if it was obvious what was going on, then it wouldn't really protect you all that well. So you may have met people with DID before and have no idea about it, and even people with DID don't always know that they have DID, because some people experience amnesia a lot more than others. So for them, they may not realise what's going on when they themselves aren't currently present. Now, as I just said, this is a result of ongoing trauma in early life. For some people, this can be in a form of extreme abuse, either physical or sexual. And although it's true that a high percentage of people with DID will report these experiences, there are many other people with DID who haven't had those experiences. The words trauma and abuse seem to be used interchangeably a lot in different sources, which can make things quite confusing. I suppose you could say that all abuse is traumatic, but not all trauma is abusive. So really, anything that a child experiences as being traumatic and distressing and has no way of coping with or escaping from, or doesn't have the correct parental support in place, can be a contributing factor. There's also a high correlation between DID and disorganized attachment styles, which is often a result of inconsistent parenting, which can be confusing to a child and make it much harder to form connections. Now, there's still a lot of things that need to be researched here. For example, there are people who may have suffered horrendously as children who don't develop DID and maybe develop a different disorder instead. So there's obviously more to it than that, but again, it's still kind of early days and we don't fully understand the mechanics behind it all. So when we look at DID as a single person's identity, their sense of self, their memories, their feelings, their thoughts, etc., as being kind of fragmented and spread across multiple parts of themselves that have kind of formed their own identities, it makes it a lot more easier to understand than simply a person having multiple people and multiple personalities existing within them. And it also makes a lot of sense as well, and it makes DID seem a lot less scary and bizarre, and it portrays it as, a creative survival, a creative coping mechanism in the face of trauma, which again I think does make a lot of sense. So yeah, that was kind of just what I wanted to talk about today. There's a lot more on the topic that I could cover, but I didn't want to bombard you with information, and I didn't want to get myself confused. I just wanted to kind of put it there in a very basic way that hopefully is understandable, and hopefully I haven't made things more confusing. But yeah, that is essentially on a basic level what dissociative identity disorder is. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you guys. I really appreciate you sticking to the end if you have. And yeah, I guess that's all we have to say today. If you've enjoyed this video, then please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more from me and Rara. You can also follow me on Patreon. A link to that will be in the description, as well as my Redbubble page where I sell various different designs. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I've been Max, aka the Rara Rabbit, and I'll see you in the next video.